Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here with Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the place, the home, the platform to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Hell, find your best, most true, authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results. Become your best authentic self. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by bringing people who have actually walked the walk. Now, folks, we're thrilled that you're back. We're thrilled that you keep finding us on Spotify and iHeartMedia and Apple Podcasts and anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as the video version. It is now on YouTube. We love watch, listen, do both. Keep liking, subscribing, sharing, telling your family, all that sort of thing. We're thrilled that you're here. And today, I get to bring a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, somebody I've admired for years. And when I talk about walking the walk, no joke, I think if you're in the Philadelphia area, you would be hard pressed to not know our guest. You'd be even more hard pressed to have not been at an event that our guest has been at, been honored at, shared at, hosted at. However, Greg DeShields' world is expanding a lot further out than the city of Philadelphia than it always has. So, from Tourism Diversity Matters, Executive Director Greg DeShields is here. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and I appreciate your introduction. I need to look at how many miles I have on travel and what my parking reimbursement is for all those events that I go to in Philly.
I was no kid. We will get to all that. I was lucky because I got reacquainted with Greg. Literally, it was a matter of a couple weeks ago, and you're going to hear me read off what has to be a partial list of accolades, awards, titles, because nobody has the time. It's no lack of respect, Greg, but honest to God, we would fill the entire episode of Elvis just reading off accolades and honors. But here's one that I loved. I got to see Greg and his husband, Tom, at the City and State Pride Power 100 event, where I got to be with Greg and watch him as he became one of the Pride Power 100 certified winners. And so I meant what I said. It's like, Greg, right away, I'm going to ask you, how do you sustain the energy to be virtually everywhere all the time? I promise you we'll walk backwards, but it's the very first thing I think about is how are you able to be, because I call that in service, to be in service with so many organizations in front of so many different events and always be on. How do you do it?
Well, you definitely need like a strong coordinator who can help manage your calendar to make sure that you're not overcommitting yourself. But, I have to say, I've always had a very authentic connection to the communities that are really affiliated or in some way or another engaged with the work that I do. Whether it was in the role that I'm in now, or when I was at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, when I was at Temple University, like through all the different organizations, building relationships was always key to the success of the organization, has always contributed to the network that I've built. I went through Leadership Philadelphia, and one of the things that Liz Dow had always said is that you've got to be a connector. And you can be a connector when you're out and about and you're shaking hands and you realize that, these aren't just people who are passing through your lives. These are people who are really ultimately connected in your life. So for me, it is without any doubt one of the key fundamentals to the success of business, but ultimately it, for me, is one of the most enjoyable parts of the work that I do.
I think it shows too. Folks, I'm just going to give you a few. Now, Greg already tipped off the fact he is the Executive Director of Tourism Diversity Matters. coming from the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. But here's just a partial list. These are a lot of the organizations that I have either met or know Greg about. Not, you talked about the Temple University and teaching at Temple University. Folks, Greg would be a qualified tourism hospitality. We'll get to the food part afterwards, but a qualified tourism and hospitality educator. The Independence Business Alliance, and I always mispronounce it, and I'm part of like the Center City Business Association, the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I am not prioritizing and going out of order. These are just a few. The Asian American Hotel Owners Association, the American Hotel Lodging Association, the Multicultural and Diversity Advisory Council. That is just a handful of some of the organizations that are in play. Greg, obviously diversity matters to you. I feel like that's part of your brand, and we'll get to that. Has it always mattered to you? Like growing up and stuff, you're a Philly guy, so has it always mattered?
I've always valued the idea of diversity and what it brings to you. My father was, military, and we traveled domestically and internationally. And in most cases, we were the only Black family that were at whatever it was that we went to.
Mhm.
But because of that, I learned to appreciate the perspectives that we bring to the table and other people bring to the table. And, over the years, it certainly evolved, whether it was things that were connected to the civil rights movement or multiculturalism, or as it evolved through diversity. But I've certainly grown in my understanding and my appreciation of it, and see it as a big contributor to overall success of society, success of business. So for me, I've just found it to be, once again, one of those cornerstones to who I am as a person.
I love that. So you just said a moment ago, they as you're saying that often your dad had the credentials of being in the Air Force,
Mhm.
and you would be the only Black family at a lot of those events.
Mhm.
Did it feel weird? Did it feel just business as usual? What was that like for you when you were attending?
I would say throughout early on, it may have seemed a little weird, but I've always felt that if I was in the room, that I had to own the seat. I always felt that if I was in the room, I had to be there because there was a reason beyond my
Mhm.
skin color that maybe brought me into that space. As I got older, I really began to appreciate what it means to be in those kind of rooms and what you can do when you're in those kind of rooms. And part of that is maybe the way that my parents were brought us up. Maybe I didn't understand it fully as I was younger, but I never felt like being in a room where I was the only Black person was something that I didn't feel that I belonged. Or I didn't feel like I couldn't contribute, or I didn't feel like I, were at the same level of contribution as others. And to that degree, I look back on my parents, who are both deceased,
Mhm.
very fondly, because that level of confidence that they built in me is something that just matured like a fine wine as I got older and older. But a lot of it was because they wanted us to always be able to stand on our own 2 feet, especially when we were the only people of color in those rooms.
Mm. So, Greg, one of the whole points of this show is I call it the arc to
Mhm.
authenticity. It's one of the best, coolest things I get to to experience is others sharing what got them from point A to point Z or B or whatever point you happen to be at. You said in an article a couple years ago, and I loved it, that a great way of introduction is introducing your family. And I just thought it was a really classy way to say it. So talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, about your mom and your dad, as you're saying they're both deceased, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
I actually love to tell that story
I want
because
to hear it.
I was introduced to a Native American person who said, you should always honor those who came before you. So I always love to say that I am the son to both Dolores and James,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
or Preston, who is my dad.
Mhm.
So interestingly enough, I look at the characteristics of both of them, and that is truly who I am as a person. So my mom was always a believer in that there's something better. She always could see that there was something to aspire to and something to achieve in life. Her phrase was always, "My ship will come in." And we always wanted that ship to come in. But
Okay.
she was always that person who had that aspiration for something better. And that is so woven inside of my DNA. And my
Wow.
father was a boxer. And one of the things that
Mhm.
I loved about my father, and this was when he was in high school, but a boxer is somebody who will continue to fight even after their body says no. And psychologically, that power. And for me, I am 100% like that as it relates to how I pursued my career. I will continue to fight because I know that there's something better, where I take the two of them and I combine them. And for me, I always feel like they're with me because if it is a networking event and I'm trying to find a way to look exactly the way I should, and the fact that if I have to speak in front of 500 people, that
Mhm.
I have the strength and the power to be able to do it. And I always know that my ability to deliver in that is because of both of them. So Dolores or Preston or James, depending upon who knew my dad, were
Mhm.
really the ones who made me who I am. And I love that every day.
So the fighter and the one who always saw the next step, that could
Absolutely.
always aspire to there as well too.
Yeah,
So take me back. You're a graduate of Johnson and Wales University, and
I
I
am.
find, well, listen, I that is just impressive to me in general. My world growing up was, I was more of seeing like the big five colleges in Philadelphia and stuff. So I love the fact that the maybe that's the aspirer with your mom, that had you looking outwards in terms of the hospitality realm. What got you to Rhode Island?
So it was funny. I always wanted to be a writer, and I was in here in Philly. I was in the KYW News Studies program,
Yup.
and I went there for a semester and thought, "Wow, I'm going to
Mm,
be a budding journalist." And there was a black writer who told
mm,
me, back during the '70s, even though I was writing, that there's a whole different life that you will experience as a black journalist. And I just didn't want that. I felt there was something different. I was still interested in writing, but I
mhm.
remember I went to Alney High School in Philadelphia. I went to my
Ah, West Oak
counselor.
Lane.
I did.
Um,
I went to my counselor, Mr.
mm,
Schneider, and I said to him, I don't know if this writing thing is for me. And he asked me, if you don't write, what did you want to do? And I said, I have no idea. And he said, well, what are the things that you like? And the only thing I could come back with an answer is that I like to eat. And when I told him that, he said, oh, you should go into culinary. You should go to Johnson and Wales. And I had no idea what Johnson and Wales was. But I'll tell you, I went to Rhode Island. I'd never been to Rhode Island. It
mm,
was, without any doubt, something that I felt so proud that I could find my way to go to a small state up in New England. My father got me a ticket because he worked for Conrail or Amtrak. And what got me about Johnson and Wales is the
mm,
personal attention that they gave me as a student. They picked me up at the
mm.
train station, but all of the
Seriously,
communication. Oh, sorry.
that's impressive. They
It was
picked you up at
very
the train
impressive.
station.
It
Wow,
was very well. Listen, it was
I
a
love that.
1976 Ford Squire with
Who cares?
wood paneling on the
Uh,
side. But they treated me with such respect.
mhm,
And even after I was finished my college tour, every correspondence I got, my name was handwritten. I had been getting other opportunities to go to other schools, and it was always a printed label. But Johnson& Wales was the only one that wrote handwritten notes. I still have a lot of the brochures that they gave me. So it was that personal connection that I had to the school. And then, of course, once I got there, it was, what better place to be? You're between Boston and New York. It was, you could drink at
at
18, so that
18.
was pretty good too. And I fell in love with New England. I still
Mm,
love New England. I had all the most fabulous professors from the 1970s and the 1980s who were in the industry.
mhm.
And it was, without a doubt, I think, the perfect launch for someone like me who found their way. But I will admit that I continue to write. I was the editor of our newspaper for 2 years and
Mhm.
editor of our yearbook for 2 years. And I won the best in publication excellence for 4 years in a row at the school. So I enjoyed that.
So let me ask you that. That's pretty awesome. What were the types of things you were writing about?
You
What
know,
mattered to you?
I I can't believe you asked me that.
Huh.
So the one article that I wrote, which got me in the biggest trouble, was there was a
Oh,
big fight.
bring it.
There was a big fight about birth control, and
Okay.
I felt that would be a cover article for my newspaper. So there was a church that was near our campus. So I went
Mm.
over and I interviewed a nun about it. And believe it or not, she was an
Gutsy.
advocate. She but wait, she was an advocate for women's rights. This was
Wow.
1977. And
Wow.
she
Wow.
was like
Wow.
advocating that women should have this choice. So we wrote this article. I put it on the cover of our newsletter.
Mhm.
I did not run it through the university to get it approved or anything. So I was sitting in class and the dean asked me to come over and he wanted to find out why I put this article on
Mhm.
the cover. And then later the Boston Globe found out about it. And then they wrote an article about it. And then I was at a conference with all editors from newspapers in the New England area. And, there was an article about how the newspaper, well, I'm sorry, the school wanted to suppress the newspaper and they wanted to restrict what was in it. And it became a really big thing. So that's how I became the editor of the yearbook, because
Oh
they
my
felt that I
God.
was maybe a little bit too rogue for the newspaper, but I was equally rogue for the yearbook.
Well, what were you doing in the yearbook that was so rogue? I'm thinking your
so,
pictures and interests and degrees
so
and majors.
I can't believe you're asking me these two, because those are like the best two stories when I was in college. So
Thank you. I want to know.
when I went to the yearbook,
Mhm.
I knew I wasn't going to be putting out a weekly newspaper, and you're putting a book together that's not going to be released until almost a year later.
Mhm.
So I had some pretty wild photographers who worked for me. So I
Mhm.
always asked them to give me some really interesting pictures. So there were a bunch of really crazy guys who did really bizarre things who were in the swim club. So there was a photographer who took them and they were mooning the people who were swimming. So they took a picture of it, and I felt it was a little too racy. So we did like the special effect and we put it on page like 79. And it wasn't until like just prior to graduation that people actually looked at the book and they saw it, and it was the most funniest thing. But it still is in the yearbook. It's a great photo.
So gutsy even at a young
You
age,
have to
right?
be. I mean,
And
you have to be.
well, here's what I'm going to say. No, you don't. I admire people that are gutsy in a young age. That's for me. It was like I was always so worried about like what you thought, and hell, I didn't come out of the closet until I was 40, and I can laugh about it now, but it wasn't funny then. I truly admire when people take stands early, even if it is something like page 79 of the swim team mooning. That's taking a stand, or finding a nun in 19, give me the year again, 19.
1977. That was my second
That's
year running it.
spectacular to me, that every dynamic of that story. So do you think that came from your parents, or is that you? Was that you always?
I certainly was able to, kind of execute on the idea, but you have to have confidence to do something like that.
Right, right.
You really have to feel that if I have to respond to it, that I can certainly, explain and respond to it. The fact that, they wanted to expel me over it, I also had to be
Mm.
smart enough to know that there was power in newspapers. So when
Yes.
I had a conversation
Mhm.
at the University of Connecticut around how they wanted to censor a newspaper, that
Mhm.
other newspapers would pick that up, and that once the Boston Globe picked up that as a story, that there was leverage behind it. But I also had to think of what are my options, what are my resources around taking
Mhm.
a bold step like that. So, but I definitely felt as though the day instilled me with confidence
Mhm.
in order to make decisions like that.
Greg, I'm thinking as you're speaking, one of the things that I'm thinking about is this. You're about, as it like using the timeline, about to embark in a hospitality led career. And I look at hospitality as almost like making sure people get what they want.
Mhm.
And if you I grew up, I was in sales for a lot of years, and before I worked up any guts to be true to me, I equated that to being a people pleaser.
Mhm.
So I love the fact that you're able to walk this line, even at a young age, of being able to be in a field of hospitality and or whatever, where you give the people what they want, and and you're still able to take stands. And as you said, you have to be. So how are you able to walk that, like, that line? To me, I find really interesting, because I would feel like the field itself hospitality in general, as I said, is a field that is makes somebody happy.
Mhm.
You
So,
know.
the hospitality industry, and I, credit it to one of my professors, Peter Van Cleet, and he always had a statement. He said, in our industry, we are, providing, one of the most perishable commodities. We basically provide people with memories, and that's
Mm,
it. No
mhm.
one says I stayed at the Ritz-Carlton in Waikiki and look what I got. Maybe they stole the towels, but I mean that experience is
Yeah.
something that we provide people. So I've
Mm,
always felt in our industry that we do
mm,
have a responsibility to provide people
mhm,
with the most incredible
mhm,
experience that they'll think about 20 years from now,
mm.
whether Google sends them the image or if their memory allows for them to think about it. That as an industry, that is paramount to what we do. And because of that and how I've evolved in my career, I think I've always, maintained a priority or focus or commitment to what those who deliver service and those who receive service and what that means in terms of the success of our industry.
I noticed that for like Rob, that you've been a manager in the hospitality industry, companies like Hyatt and Omni and Sheraton and Corman and like the elite group. What were some of the things that like some of the takeaways as you were ascending in terms of professionally? What were some of the takeaways that you feel like when you talked about, and I want you to go back to what you just said a second ago, the difference between, and can you repeat it for me so I don't just talk over it? That line that you're saying between those being serving and those being served. I love that.
Right. I mean, those are really paramount in our business
Mhm.
because, we are driven by those who represent our organization, provide that direct customer service. And then the other is those guests who come into our establishments,
Mm.
save money, gone into debt, whatever it is, that
Right.
we're able to deliver on the promise of what we offer them. As I think back in all the different organizations that I've worked for,
Mhm.
they've all contributed significantly in terms of my ability to aspire in my career. I went through a management training program when I came out of Hyatt, and I think that was an important step for me
Mhm.
because it allowed for me to understand there is a corporate structure to this industry. Representing a company like Hyatt was an absolutely amazing
Mhm.
way to launch your career. Later, when I left for Hyatt, I went to work for Omni, which was a quality brand that
Yeah.
offered me incredible ways of looking at their business. And then later working for Sheridan, both on their franchise and their corporate side, helped
Mhm.
me to just understand the nuances of the business. And so for me, it was always evolving and understanding the business. But I will say that there became a point in my career where I had to look beyond the operational side of what we do and
Mhm.
realize that there are people who are making decisions about how hospitality exist in a particular location. And through the environments of an academic institution like Temple, and then later
Mhm.
working for other organizations, I was able to maybe step away from what was the operational purview and have a better sense of the industry and of the business itself.
So when you went to the Philadelphia Convention and Visitor Bureau and you are challenged in a sense with being the consummate cheerleader for Philadelphia, but you've got to also be able to position
Mm.
in the most strategic ways possible why organizations, why we're going to fill up the convention center, why we've got to fill these hotel rooms. What was it like for you to take on that responsibility in regard, because I feel like that is such like a pressure packed role.
Well,
And how did you do it?
Well, I will tell you this from the very beginning. It was a
Yeah.
dream job. I
Mhm.
wanted that job for over 13 years. So I am not at all going to say, oh, it landed in my lap. And
Mhm.
I was, before me, there was Ramona Risco Benson, who led that division,
Right.
Tanya Hall, who I tell everybody, she's my sister from another mother. And I
Mhm.
served on the board for 13 years. So I had been exposed to, Tom O'Doon, who was an absolute consummate professional and leading that
Right.
organization. And
Mhm.
then later, I had the incredible opportunity through being hired by Jack Ferguson for my dream to come true. Like, it was no question that I wanted this job, like with
Mm.
every ounce of who I was. And what was important for me, though, is I had been with the organization as a board member for 13 years, and I learned the importance of the division, what it meant to the customers, what it meant to the diverse businesses in Philadelphia, what it
Mhm.
meant to diverse leaders in Philadelphia, what it meant to the city government. Like it was an important, integral part of the perception of Philadelphia as a multicultural destination. And
Right.
when I came to that position, we were evolving to move beyond multiculturalism to diversity. And it was me who loved and always wanted to be the executive director of the
Mhm.
Multicultural Affairs Congress, who had to kind of put that name to rest and then create that evolution to PHL diversity. And what was important was I always stayed true and committed to the history of the organization while charting the path for the future. And although Jack was only with us for a while, I had the honor to work with Julie Coker, and
Oh.
she was an amazing person because Julie encouraged
Mhm.
for me to be a innovative, creative thinker and be a risk taker. It was in her DNA, and I certainly had no problem with adapting to it. So that time there was one of personal fulfillment. I had a passion for it. It was a job that I always wanted. And because they gave me such a platform of evolution and innovation, I would definitely say it was my dream job, and I loved
Mm.
it.
Can I ask you a terribly dumb question, but I'll risk it?
Sure.
What would you describe as how would you define the difference between multicultural and diversity?
Well, multicultural really deals more with the ethnicity and the cultural identification of communities.
Yeah. Okay.
But then for us, we wanted to expand beyond that because we represented, this race and ethnic perspective of
Right.
Philadelphia, and we wanted a more diverse point of view. So for us, we expanded to include women and LGBTQ. And
Got
that
it.
was very different. So that's how we really
Mhm.
expanded. But don't get me wrong, because that
Mhm.
also includes people with disabilities, and there are
Mhm.
a variety of others. There's 19 different dimensions of diversity, but that's where we landed on back in 2017.
No, that helps me because that's one of the things where I didn't. That's just my own ignorance, not quite understanding the difference. And one of the things that I think about, what I was so impressed by, and I alluded to it in the very beginning, was that the different cultures, the different ethnicities, being a part of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, you being a part of a board member of IBA, you being a part of the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, that I feel like it was one of those things where before I went to work with Univision Communications, I went to work with Univision in 2006.
Mhm,
I didn't know those organizations existed.
mhm,
And it's like, shame on me, you know what I mean? It was like they were there and they were doing good things, and I just didn't know.
mhm,
And I didn't exactly kill myself to seek them out.
mhm,
And so I feel like, as you being somewhat of a trailblazer in that regard, that you're literally seeking, or these organizations are
mhm.
finding you. Um, why did it matter so much to you personally that you needed to be affiliated with all of them?
So we talk a lot about two important things: cultural diversity, that you
Yeah.
put yourself in a study of all of these different cultures, and that you then become more educated. And then ultimately, that I became culturally competent, that I
Mhm,
could sit at the
mhm,
table and enjoy an Asian Chinese celebration, and that I'm going to enjoy every one of the 19, 16, 17 courses, right?
mhm,
Or, I'm going to be very much comfortable with the cultural norms that they have. I always loved, and I still am on the board for the Hispanic Chamber.
yeah.
I should point out, though, because of my commitment to the Latin, or in Philadelphia, Hispanic Latino community,
Mhm,
I always felt like they identified me as, Dominican. And that was a way of saying he looks Dominican, so he can be on
mhm,
our board. And then I
mhm,
learned a lot about the Dominicans, and I had a great appreciation for them. But that was a way of me becoming much more culturally competent, because of my exposure as well as my sense of diversity. And I think that's one of the
mhm,
reasons why I love the idea that I was able and still seek to have that ability to be at the table with
mhm.
others, so that I'm able to become much more knowledgeable, insightful, competent of those communities. And you can move forward in so many ways because of that level of education that you get as a result of it. But each time I've worked with or been representative on any of these boards or committees,
Right.
I've always found it to be very rewarding.
Mm. I'm smiling because I can remember when I first went to Univision, it was probably, oh, it was at least 60 days where I felt very much like fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I really did. I had come from Tribune and I was with an independent television station prior, and I really felt lost. Like it was more that sense of like I was recruited to go over and blah blah blah. None of that matters, but it was more. It's like, what do they want? Why? What am I going to bring here? You know, and all that stuff. And there's three words that somebody shared, and that's why I started to smile. And it was one of my colleagues that I grew to love at Univision. Her name's Sarah Hassan, and she married a Dutchman. She refers to herself as the blonde Nordic Latino. and and she said to me, the words are welcome, invite, and include. And
Wow.
I'll never forget the feeling. She said, just give it a little while. She said, you'll
Mm,
see that it's going to take hold. And I stayed with Univision for 12 and a half years. And it was one of the best business
mm,
experiences I ever had. And mostly because it just felt so damn good.
mm,
It just felt so damn good.
mm,
My Espanol is so, but the fact of the matter is, I was always included after that like trial period. You know that it was I was always included, and people made me feel great, and there was nothing like a feeling of being welcomed.
mhm,
You know,
mm,
success is a whole other part of it, but it's just that sense of being welcomed. The
mhm,
dinners that we were at, you know, like going to like the dinners and the cuisines that you talked about with the Asian was, you know, that being a part of the 16 to 18 courses, the foods, the vibe, the music, the
mhm,
energy, it was so different
mm,
than what I had encountered, and it was the coolest feeling. And one of the things that I think about now is that I force myself to make certain that I'm not in this linear box of, you know, just go here and just do that. And I just got back, like it's been a while, but I was at Tierra Colombiana in Philadelphia. Folks, if you're listening in Philadelphia, you would know about Tierra Colombiana, or you should. And I just walked past Mixto the other day and part of the Pride celebration, and I remember just I kept looking in the windows thinking it's the most inclusive place I've ever seen. So folks, the biggest thing for me, and that's why I keep asking Greg this, what feels like the same question, is that sense of challenge yourself to try other cuisines, cultures, people, be in it, because it changed my world. And Greg, for you, as I said, it's like it's so fun to see you out and about, because the fact of the matter is I've seen you at a number of events, and there's never an event where you look like you're out of place. You look like you should be there. You know what I mean? Front and center. What's it like when you take on leadership roles? So you've evolved. You were talking about speaking in front of five, you know what I mean? You've commanded some pretty big stages, being honored, giving speeches. When you're speaking, do you typically speak more from the heart, or do you typically speak more like prepared to, what is like when you're speaking to an audience often, how do you typically go about, like what's the process for you?
Well, it's certainly content is everything. So
Right.
we, through the work that we do at Tourism Diversity Matters,
Mhm.
we developed our signature sessions. And, I've been fortunate to be an adjunct professor. So
Mhm.
you know how you kind of navigate your conversation. I will certainly speak to the content, but there are portions of it where you can speak, you know, um, from your heart about
Yeah.
that. And I think that audiences connect with that authenticity
Mhm.
of being able to, provide it and then share some aspects of it that allows for it to be more humanistic in the way that they hear you and how they connect with you. But it's always for me, driven with content. If you got really solid content, you know the content really well,
Mhm.
then you can certainly add those areas of personal insight or personal feelings that allows for you to get greater credibility with the audience.
Do you recall? I'm just thinking from. I'll go first on the larger side, and then I absolutely want to walk backwards a little bit in terms of
Mhm.
tourism diversity matters. But like I said, not forwards, not backwards, forward. Sorry. That in terms of a speech or a presentation you gave that you felt like had impact or just made you feel great overall. Can and you probably have had way more than one, but is there any that jumps to you?
So the one that for me will forever mean the most
Mhm,
to me is when I moved into the role as the executive director of PHL Diversity.
mhm,
And, the organization had gone through some reorganization.
mhm.
We had added new communities. Some people didn't necessarily think that we should. So, but the MAC luncheon, the Multicultural Affairs luncheon, was
Yeah.
always the event. Like you
Mhm,
always went to it. So on a high end, maybe they had 400, 450 people, but to
mhm,
me, it was always big. And I always envisioned that that was a measure of success. So I moved into the role in April and we had a luncheon planned in October. And we're rebranding and we're adding new people. And we went through all of this stuff and a little bit of turmoil here and there. But I remember when I went out on that stage at the Marriott and we
mhm.
had 650 people, and I remember looking at a shot that somebody took from the back of the room, and I wish my parents would have been alive to see it because
Right,
there's
right.
two huge IMAX
Mhm,
screens with my image, and I'm standing in the middle at a podium and I'm delivering opening remarks. And for me, that will forever be
mhm,
probably one of what I've always felt was the best verification of achieving your dreams in your career because
mhm,
I had gone to that lunch for so many years and I always saw these amazing people speak.
mhm.
And when I look at that image, it was on the cover of Aldea, and I just remember that one for me was like one of the most powerful images. Now, don't get me wrong, I've had to speak in front of some fabulous, very large groups since then. But if you ever say like, what was that watershed moment that led you believe like you could be in front
Mhm.
of a group? That was it by far, hands down. It's an
What year was that? Do you
amazing
remember?
photo.
Tell me again.
That would have been the first year I got to the bureau. So I
Right.
left Temple in 2015. 2015.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Beautiful. I feel like I'm pretty certain I was at that event too.
Oh my
That
God,
was
that
a
was
signature. I'm pretty certain it was, and it
yeah.
was the grand scale. Folks, Greg, you're so right. That was the must go to, and there were a lot of must go to events in Philadelphia, but
Mhm,
that absolutely was
mhm,
right there.
mhm,
Greg, what I'm finding, I was saying, walking backwards. What I am thinking about is a very significant walk forward, but I was intentionally asking about grand scales because I loved. So, folks, you weren't privy to the conversation that we got to have, Greg and I, a couple weeks ago with Greg's husband in regards to at City and State. And right prior to the event, we're downstairs, and you're talking to me about tourism diversity matters. And I remember when you started to explain to me what you were doing, where you were traveling to, and who you were speaking to, it was at that moment that I remember thinking, "Oh, I have to get him on the show," and because one of the things you hear people will say is, "You really want to make an impact, do it on a smaller scale," and all that stuff. So talk to us about tourism diversity matters, what got you to do it, how it's unfolded. I definitely want to hear more.
Well, it's funny. I tell everybody we're one of those COVID silver lining stories. So,
Okay.
I was very happy and very excited about the work I was doing at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and then
Mhm.
COVID came along. And as a result of COVID, I unfortunately became amongst the casualties that a lot of people experienced and became part-time. And that was just a month or two before the murder
Mhm.
of George Floyd. And our president of Tourism Diversity Matters, Mike Gamble, leads an executive search firm that's located in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Mhm.
And, Mike is one of those guys. He was on the board for the Multicultural Affairs Congress. He worked at the Bureau. but Mike has a passion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he
Mhm.
felt that this was really an opportunity for our industry to create an organization that would be that resource for the entire industry.
Right.
He was able to be joined by Brian Stevens, who is an influential person in the meetings and events industry,
Mhm.
leading Conference Direct, and then our very own Greg Karen from the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors
Right.
Bureau came on as one of the partners, and then Elliot Ferguson, who's the president of Destination DC, and at the time he was chair of U.S. Travel, he came on as our inaugural board chair, and we had said we were going to create an organization that would be the go-to for our industry, and that we will be ultimately forever sustainable with a 365-day a year focus around DEI. And in our
Mhm.
industry, there are a lot of organizations that do it, and we work collaboratively with everyone, but we want to be that go-to source for strategies, resources, and tactics. And
Mhm.
we have a board of leaders of just about every organization in our industry, which certainly allows for us to stay grounded. We are a greater good organization, so we don't charge for what we do, but we do want to be resourceful. And I tell everybody in my first year, I was in Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, and Kalispell, Montana, and places that you wouldn't expect someone to want to talk about diversity. But there are a
Mhm.
lot of really good people who live in those places who still believe and have always believed that the more diversity that they can bring to their destination, the better the opportunities are. So we have a talent pipeline, we have an apprentice program, we operate across the country. We do a number of keynotes around the subject. We do assessments of organizations which have been just about in all corners of our country. And we work collaboratively with Temple University and San Diego State around research. But, for me, one of the things, as you think of your career, and obviously a lot of people, ultimately think of what kind of legacy can they leave and what can they do for the industry. The work that we're doing at TDM is really meant to be that constant focus around DEI, and it will be an organization that will weather the storm of challenges that we encounter today and challenges that we encounter in the future, because it's crucially important for the diversity of the staff, and it's crucially important to our diverse customers. And because it is a business strategy, it allows for organizations that evolve as DEI evolve to make better decisions to lead their organization to success. So I'm thrilled to be in this role. They give me such creative opportunity, such as the event that we're doing in Philadelphia on October 23rd and
Yep.
24th, Collective Experience. We'll
Mhm.
bring over 500 leaders of DEI to what other place than Philadelphia to talk about, the future and the current challenges that we face and how we can come up with solutions that provide leaders and influencers to go back and make a difference in their organization. So I absolutely am in love with the work that I do. And as much as I loved working at the Convention and Visitors Bureau, I really love working at Tourism Diversity Matters.
All right, so here's of Oklahoma, Montana, Nebraska, Missouri. I'll stay with those four. Which one was your favorite? What was your favorite of those four?
So it's two. I loved being in Nebraska because the speed limit is 85 miles an hour. The roads
Ooh.
are flat. And I was driving this really like souped up sports car. And that was it was a hoot to do that. But Kalispell, Montana is absolutely beautiful. Everything they talk about Montana, the scenery, the atmosphere is just absolutely amazing. And I went to dinner and I had like the best steak dinner you could ever imagine. So
Mm.
you're in Montana, of course you're going to get
You,
fantastic food.
you
But the people
right?
were amazing. There was no branded stores. It was all like independent, just looking at the mountains and the snow. And you're in
Mhm.
Kalispell, which is just a really cute town. It by far Kalispell was the most memorable one. I took a ton of pictures. It's amazing place. If you have a chance, I would definitely say one should go there.
That's kind of the thing I think in terms, like you talk about COVID silver linings,
Mm.
that it's not just who you get to speak to, but where. And I think for me, I find this exhilarating
Mm.
in the sense that I'm stealing your line from another article, that it's more fulfilling to impact a small number of people in a big way, as small changes have the power to make a huge difference. So
Mm.
first, I think of the geography in terms of places that I may never have thought to go in my lifetime,
Mhm.
never. And
Mm.
just having this conversation, it's
Mm.
this reminder that it's like, okay, these people, it's not everybody needs diversity. Obviously, that sounds kind of
Mm.
redundant, but the fact it's more of the case
Mm.
where you think, will they receive it?
Mm.
And you're saying I met amazing people out there. Is it exhilarating or surprising when you're going to these smaller places for you?
Well, I've learned never to prejudge where I'm invited to speak because
Right.
they're asking you to be there for a reason, and I always want to deliver. But when I was in Nebraska, I was speaking at the
Mm.
Nebraska State Tourism um, Conference. It's put on by the governor's office and
Right.
tourism. And I was the keynote for their lunch, and I did a
Mm.
presentation about diversity. And within my presentation, I had a rainbow flag, and I think I may have mentioned the LGBTQ community. So I
Mhm.
went to a breakout session where we talked about the language of diversity, but there was a guy who came over who lives not too far from where the event took place, and he produces their pride. And he says, I've come to this conference for the last 15 years. He says, I've never seen a rainbow flag. And he says, no one's ever talked about LGBTQ.
Okay.
And he said, for me, it was the most fulfilling experience in
Mm.
my entire life that you were able to put a face on our
Mhm.
community. And
Mhm.
I was speechless because here I am, like in Nebraska, and someone is like, really saying that your voice matters. And that statement about speaking to sometimes a small community, that
Yeah.
has a big impact. That
Mm.
motivated him to
Mhm.
weather the storm even more, to know that like there's people that hear him and people who
Mhm.
see him. So that was a fantastic experience.
Mhm.
So I very much
Mhm.
believe in that when you are invited to these small communities, that those are probably amongst the best opportunities to speak because they genuinely do want to hear from you and gain your insights and guidance.
What are some of, like, speaking of your insights, what in term oh, and maybe we're gonna
Mm.
channel your mom in terms of
Mm.
aspiring and negative. What would you like with this current responsibility that you're shouldering? What would you like to be able to impact, or how would you like to be able to impact? 5-year questions are tough, and but
Right.
even if over the next year or so, what would you like to convey, accomplish, communicate?
All right. So obviously, from a business perspective, that
Yeah.
our conference is a big success.
Yeah.
But more importantly, is for leaders to understand that you don't fix diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mhm.
and that leaders have to be patient and implement it as a business strategy in any as would be any business strategy, and that they have to build in a sense of measurable outcomes to determine whether this worked or not. But understanding that you have to resource it, you have to give it time to be integrated in your organization. But
Mhm.
that takes time. Our first project now is maybe in its second year. So for us, we can see some of what we made recommendations and how it's beginning to be normalized within their organization. But some leaders want immediate return on that investment, or they
Mhm.
want to see immediate um, changes. But culture change is not overnight; it takes time. So what I would always want is for leaders to think more strategically about the work that they do and provide the appropriate amount of resources and time for it to take effect in a positive way to change your organization.
So those leaders appropriating the correct amount of resources and
Mhm.
time or what have you, what would you recommend to the entrepreneurs that are listening here, business leaders, a small step or two that you could take in your organization that would enable you to accomplish those goals, like
Right,
using your time well, using your resources
right.
well.
So, the one that I always recommend,
Mhm.
because diversity is something that you can do in small, medium, and large. There are a
Okay.
lot of other bells and whistles that you can get into when you get bigger. But if it was one thing that I would say, small, medium, and large, embrace supplier diversity. Make sure that the economic capabilities that you have are something that can be distributed across those diverse communities of which you live. So, of course, you want to think about, can I do a diversity statement, or can I, establish an employee resource group? All of that stuff is great. But if you are a business and you buy coffee, or you purchase advertising, or you need shuttle service, there are diverse businesses that can deliver that. And I would encourage you that if you want to immediately and measurably get involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion, start with the economics of it. Create business access. Make sure that you're inviting diverse businesses to bid on contracts, to provide you products and services. And what you in turn find is that you will then become even that much more connected to those communities. And then on the other side of how you operate your business, when you do your annual report, you should be able to show the distribution of dollars that you've shared by way of procuring products and services from diverse communities. So I would say, without any doubt, the first step should be look at your supplier diversity efforts and make sure that they are inclusive and bring on as many diverse businesses as possible.
I love that. You've influenced an awful lot of people. And I'm always, when I speak to an influencer, I always am curious, who has influenced you?
So no question, Valerie Ferguson. I tell everyone
that's a fast answer. Like, no.
Valerie is at the end of the day, when it comes to like who in this industry did I want to emulate, it was her. When I was a management trainee at Hyatt Hotels in Atlanta back in 1980, she was the front desk manager. And, listen, I love my mom and all the other Black women I know. But, Valerie was the front office manager in a 950 room hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. And she was beautiful. She was smart. She was just like, when you saw her, you're just like, oh my God, I just want to be her. And Valerie has been like my North Star forever. And I remember when she left from the Hyatt Regency Atlanta, because she went on to have a career with Ritz-Carlton and Lowe's and everything else. What stuck in my mind is how she said, the next time I walk back in this hotel, I'm going to be general manager. And it was maybe, I don't know, 5 to 7 years later, when she came back to that hotel, it for me was like, I'm sure for her it was an amazing feeling, but for me, it was even that much more. It was a confirmation of what I could do in this business. But I tell everyone that, and I have no shame in how often I call her out. I'll be at a big dinner and people will say, do you have anything you want to say about someone? I'm like, Valerie Ferguson. She's an amazing young woman who has been a trailblazer, and she has set the path for so many people of color in this industry. And I'm amongst those who, whenever anyone asks me, she is the first go-to person that I will always acknowledge.
God, I love that. I love that. Couple more personal questions, because you've been really generous. You talked about when you were driving around in Nebraska with the flat roads and the 85-mile-an-hour speed limit or whatever, and you're tooling around in some hot sports car. You're a car guy. What is it? I've seen several social media photos lately, and it seemed like teal blue was the color of record.
Actually, it's electric blue.
Thank you, and thanks for the correction. I'll accept.
When you talk to my car dealer, I am, without any doubt, a just car crazy. I have a subscription to Motor Trend on my television and my magazine and everything. I love cars. I love sports cars. I miss V8, but I probably have one of the most butch cars I've ever had before now. I'm one step below the Cadillac Blackwing, but I have a Cadillac V and GT5, and it is fabulous. It growls, which I love, and it's got like more gadgets than you can imagine. It's just, I absolutely love it. And, I just love cars, and I've had fabulous cars, throughout my life, but this one is definitely one of the top ones that I've had.
I love this, and since obviously you can't do this all by yourself, your husband Tom grabbed himself new wheels.
We added a lot to the economy.
Do you have to buy two cars together at the same time, or do you take turns, or whenever the lease runs out?
Our leases are synchronized now, so we both got ours just about days apart. But for the last 2 leases, they've been getting closer to the timing. and I'm assuming that either our insurance company or dealers know that we're both up
Mhm.
for our up renew of our lease. But yeah, he's similar to me. I think he's had about as many as I've had. So
So do the neighbors get weird when they hear your car growling? I'm just curious. I don't want to sound like the cranky old man, but you've got a car that growls.
well,
Do they get
so
weird or like it?
So what I found out is this car has a stealth mode. So you can actually hit stealth that will
So
turn
what
down any
happens?
kind of noise, and it will instead pipe the noise in the car. But it's actually a button that says stealth mode, so that you
And it
can
shoots it
be
in
that kind of stuff.
directly at you.
It puts it into the interior of the car because some of that sound is naturally funneled in to kind of give you that feel. So no, my neighbors are more concerned with what kind of crazy color is he gonna have, and this is crazy. So,
I love that. I love that. So you've been together with Tom. Did I do my math right? 28 years, 29 years?
no, 31 years. It'll be
Oh my
32.
God. Oh my God. I
30
hate messing up math. Um,
yeah.
what would you think Tom would say about you in regards to what draws him to you? And I'll ask you the same question about Tom.
Well, I mean, I am the eternal optimist, and
Mm,
when, I met Tom, I think that was one of the things that he admires, and he does say that about me. He says, "You've always just been very optimistic." And, we all go through life and we all have our ups and downs, and I've always tried
mm,
to find, the higher road. So, I would say he
mm.
would probably say that I'm just very optimistic, and he likes that about me.
What do you see? What is it about Tom?
His
All
smile.
these years later.
It's his smile. From the very first minute I saw him, it was his smile, and every day, even with his beard now, but it has always been his smile, and then second to his smile is his eyes, like, and I go to butter, and whenever that is the case, whether
Oh,
either the two of them, but it first was his smile. When I first saw his smile, I just was so incredibly taken back by that, and, every day I see it, and the what it means to you, how it makes you feel is just, absolutely amazing. So but I always say it's a smile, absolutely.
I gotta tell you, first of all, that's beautiful. The way you said, the way that makes you feel, Greg DeShields, the way that you make me feel, that it's such a powerful conversation. And as I said, it really means a lot when somebody is authentic, as you shows up and shows the way. So I'm really grateful that you made the time today. It means the world to me, and I thank you
Thank
from the
you.
bottom of my heart. What is the best way? Look, I've got, like I said again, we've got, what we will do is also for the conference,
Mhm.
we will have the link in regards to ticket sales on this podcast link. So folks, as you're watching and or listening, you're going to see a link in regards to the conference itself. Give me the dates one more time and we'll get right.
So the conference is October 23rd
Mhm.
and 24th. It's a real short conference. We
Mhm.
start at 11 a.m. on the 23rd and we end at 1:30 on the
Mhm.
24th, and we'll
Mhm.
be at the Hilton Pence Landing in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, PA. So folks, if you're local watching or listening to this, get there for those 2 days. And Greg, your links will be up as well. What's the best way to find you?
The best way to find me is certainly on LinkedIn, but I'm also present on Facebook and Twitter. But
Mhm.
I would say the first go-to one for most is on LinkedIn.
And folks, you're going to see the LinkedIn profile is right here as well too. Greg DeShields, thank you so much again, man. You made it great for me, and I truly appreciate you.
Awesome. Thank you. I've absolutely enjoyed this.
Thank you so much. And folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. We talk about this arc of authenticity. See, told you, told you. Thank you so much for joining us, tuning in, watching, listening, liking, subscribing. Tell your folks, tell your friends. I'm John Duffin with Duffin Media. Thanks so much for making the time for us. Have a great rest of the day. Be good, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.